How many times have you seen someone or heard someone online or in person say the words or the phrase or something along the lines of, "I don't feel God's presence anymore"? Or how many times have you maybe said that yourself or felt it? And so many of us wonder, where did he go? Has he abandoned me? And I did this myself recently in a video that an episode that I made. There was a segment in that episode where I talk about how I would get so discouraged that I just could not feel God's presence anymore. I couldn't feel him. I couldn't tell that he was in my life. Everything was dark around me, and I just was so desperate to feel it again. I longed to feel it, and I couldn't figure out why. So I've come to a new revelation recently. It's not because God has abandoned me that I don't feel his presence. When God feels silent in my life, it doesn't mean that he has turned away from me. It usually means that I have turned away from him and that I have abandoned him in some way. And there's so many things that we do in our everyday lives, things that we feel, circumstances that we live in that draw us away from God. When I find myself in that situation where I'm just desperate to feel God's presence in my life, I see that it's usually because I have allowed myself to become too influenced by the world, by my circumstances, by problems in my life, in my marriage, with my kids, with my finances, all of these things that affect us every single day. I've allowed these things to control me, to dictate how I feel and how I live and how I function, instead of my trust remaining in God, that he will handle it for me. This does not mean that we should never, ever feel worry or concern about whatever it is that we are facing. It just means that when we do worry or have concerns or fears, that we should trust in God all the time. And the moment that we stop trusting in him, the moment that we give up our control to the enemy, instead of letting God handle it, that is when God starts to feel distant. And this doesn't apply just to problems, issues, trauma, circumstances. It also applies to when everything is going just fine. Everything in life is beautiful and we're happy, but we still don't feel God's presence. It's because even in our happy, joyful moments, when everything is going right, we're putting too much of ourselves into those things and into the world, and we forget that God is there. We forget to praise him, to acknowledge him, to show him our love and appreciation for all of these wonderful things that we have in this happy life that we live. And of course God is going to feel distant because we are the ones shoving him aside. And I'm guilty of this in my bad moments and in my good moments. In my good moments, I'm too happy, or used to be. I mean, sometimes I still do. It slips every now and then, but in my good moments, I'm too happy to think about God all the time, or used to be. I'm too happy to have to feel like I need to rely on God. But that's the problem. When we are happy, we think we don't need him, but we need him every second of every day, in every moment, no matter what. Through the good and through the bad, we need him, absolutely. And we cannot just forget that he's there when we are happy, when everything is going well, when we have money, we don't have to worry about our bills, we don't have to worry about anything, just about. We forget that God is there. We forget that God is the source of our happiness. Because God is supposed to be the center of our lives and not just a part of it. That is so very important that we remember that. And I have had to remind myself every day that that is the case, that God is everything, and without Him we are nothing, and that we can do nothing. But let's face it, most of the time when we feel distant from God, or when we feel like God is distant from us, it's usually in those bad moments, those trials, or just when we are in depression and we feel like God has abandoned us. And that is the enemy's plan, because the enemy wants us to blame God. He wants us to think that because we don't feel God in our life, that God has somehow turned away from us and is not concerned with us and our problems. And this is especially true for me. So many recent events that have happened. Last year, when my mom had the re-emergence of cancer diagnosis, and I had to go back to the United States quickly and to help her and to be with her, it turned my world upside down. It made me stop working on projects. It made me just kind of put everything to a halt. And then when I came back to Mexico, after I had been there for a little while, and she had a better doctor's report that her tumors had shrunk significantly and the chemo was seemed to be doing its job, and I felt that it was okay enough that I come back home with my husband, and my brothers were there and my sisters-in-law were there to also help her. Came back and I was just lost. Before I had left, I felt God's presence everywhere. I was reading the Bible so much, anticipating every word, and I was immersed in the Word of God. I was immersed in God's love for me and the light surrounding me and all of that good stuff that we anticipate when we have a relationship with God, or when we're new to Christ and that's what we expect. All of those things were there. But then when I came back, everything had changed. And it took me quite a while to get my motivation back up, to get back into the swing of things. And finally, I had started working on another project, which I kind of abandoned the one before, and I tend to do that, but that's off topic. And I was so inspired and motivated and was happy about it. And then one day I started feeling just off, very depressed and down. And I didn't know what was happening. Where did this, come from out of left field? And then I prayed tearfully to God, just tell me what you want me to do. Because I wanted to feel His presence and I couldn't understand why I suddenly wasn't feeling it. And within 5 minutes of me praying that prayer, I got a text message from my daughter basically saying my mom was going into hospice. And that was my answer. I needed to go back. So that's exactly what I did. I dropped everything. I gave up the new plans that I had. I knew that it was going to do the same thing as it did before, and that I would feel lost again on the way back, but I didn't care because I needed to go be with my mom. And I did, and she died a week after I got there. And I stayed about a month with my family, and then I came back, and it was the same cycle over and over again. And I kept wondering, why is God distant? Why has He abandoned me? Why, one of the worst moments of my life, losing my mom or their cancer reemergence, why am I not feeling it? Why can I feel it before His presence, before these things happened, but then when I need Him most, He's not there? And it's not because He's not there. It was because I had allowed fear and worry and depression and darkness and heartbreak to consume everything. I allowed the enemy to get inside my head, to get inside my heart, and to manipulate me to make me feel distant from God, but not to make God feel distant from me. God is always there. That I know. He doesn't always answer our prayers. Things don't always go our way every time we want them to go our way. But He's always there. He's never going to let anything happen to me or you or anyone else that He does not approve of, that does not align with His plan and our purpose in His plan. When things arise, when things happen in our relationships and in our jobs, with our finances, whatever it is, we have to remember that God is not pulling away from us. We are pulling away from Him, and we are allowing the world and the enemy and society, which is all ungodly, to control us, to manipulate us, and to make us feel like God has abandoned us. There's another situation where when someone feels that God has abandoned them, or that they just don't feel God in their life anymore, and they don't understand why, because they're not doing anything wrong. They think they're doing everything right, is when those of us who are Christians are trying to do everything right. We're trying to make all the right decisions. We're trying to read the Bible every day. We're trying to pray on a schedule. We're trying to go and do all the good things, feed the poor and help the homeless, and do all of these things that we call good works, and we still feel distant from God. And we're wondering, why? If I'm doing all of this and I'm praising God every day and I'm going to church and I pray every night and I talk to God all the time, we have to stop and ask ourselves, are we doing too much? Are we going overboard? Do we think that it's there's some kind of rule book that we have to play by? In a way there is, of course, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being too legalistic. Because even in our quest to prove ourselves to God and to ourselves, that we can be good Christians and do all the good Christian things, we can do too much, that it becomes overwhelming. And that can also pull us away from God, because we don't realize it, but we're actually focusing more on the tasks themselves and the good deeds themselves than we are with our relationship with Christ. So even when we think we're doing all the right things, that can also pull us away from God if we don't take a step back and check ourselves. Make sure that we're not putting effort into doing these things, but forgetting that we just need to love God. Sometimes that can be hard to differentiate, but if it becomes stressful, that is a really good sign that maybe you're doing too much, or you're not enjoying it. You're doing it because you feel obligated instead of because it's coming from your heart. And that is where you need to draw the line. But there are so many things that pull us away from God every single day. And I'm going to talk about a couple of those things that happen to me in my particular situations. The first one is secular music, television, books, and movies. This is a no-brainer. If we watch evil stuff, we're going to be influenced by evil. If we pack our brains full of ungodly music, toxic relationships, and all of these things of the world that are just unhealthy for our souls, of course, it's going to pull us away from God. Another one is spending too much time on a project that does not remind me of God, or has nothing to do with God. It could be a hobby, it could be one of our passions, it could be a job, it could be a relationship with someone. Anything that you spend too much time on, more than God, and it doesn't in some way make you think of God when you're doing it, or it doesn't remind you of Him in any way whatsoever, but actually does the opposite. Of course, we're not going to feel God's presence in our lives. Another one is not making reading the Bible and spending time in God's Word a priority every single day. I have been reading the Bible every day for a couple of years now. I've read through the entire Bible 3 times now, I think. I can't remember, but I think it's 3 times. And I find that when I miss a day, just one day, my mind starts to drift. It makes it easier for me to miss a second day and a third day, and then to wake up one day and it's been months or years later. That happened to me several years ago when I tried to read it every single day. I would be doing good for a little while, and then all of a sudden I would miss a day for whatever reason, and then it would just go downhill from there. But not making God's Word a priority. And not just reading the Bible, but I like to spend time listening to certain church podcasts and watching several YouTube channels that I really enjoy that are God-centered, and those keep me grounded to Him, because it's so easy to get lost in the world, to get caught up in the world, and it just takes everything away from us, including God and His presence and His light. It's taking it away from us, not Him. Another one is letting my old personality bleed through this new one that I'm trying to perfect. Perfection's not possible, but just for the sake of the conversation. I don't want to be the old Jessica. I just don't. In the sense that I used to be loud, obnoxious, and vulgar, and I don't like the person that I used to be. It did nothing for my self-esteem, my confidence. It did nothing for my relationship with other people. It was detrimental. It did the opposite of help me in any way whatsoever. And when I find myself talking with my husband about someone, maybe gossiping about someone, or giving in to 2 of my biggest sins, which are gluttony and anger, then those things take me away from God, because I am essentially paying most attention to the enemy and his tactics and all the things that he does to keep me from my Father in heaven. And the last one that I want to talk about briefly is allowing guilt and depression to consume me. I have mentioned in previous episodes that I lived with a 25-year plus long battle with depression and anxiety. And then when I came to Christ, He just almost instantaneously healed me of that. I still, to this day, I just can't believe how miraculous that was, because I lived my life that way for so long and I knew nothing else. And it was just the most amazing thing to me that He could just take that away. And I was a new person, like overnight. And every now and then, that depression tries to creep in, because the enemy knows. The enemy knows all the things that get us, that will turn us away from God. And that is one of the things for me. It's depression and anxiety and nostalgia that makes me depressed. I find myself sitting around daydreaming about my past, about my childhood in Greers Ferry and on Baseline Road and South Heights Trailer Park, or some people called it Southern Pines. And I would start to miss that. And it would cause depression. It didn't really so much make me happy as a lot of nostalgia does. It would cause me to feel very dark, like this cloud was just consuming me. And it was just hard to control. But once I did that, once I allowed the enemy in through that door, it was just almost all over from there. It's like a faucet dripping water, just a little drip at a time. You can either turn it off and not listen to it anymore, or you can turn it on all the way, and then the water just gushes, the darkness gushes, and then you find yourself trying to stay afloat and not drown in your own darkness. I hope that this episode could help you in some way, or maybe it can help someone that you know. But if you ever feel like God is distant in your life, or that God has abandoned you, please take a step back, reevaluate your circumstances, and ask yourself first, what are you doing wrong? What are you allowing to control you instead of allowing God to control it? What have you allowed into your life that you know is going to take you away from God? What are you doing in your life? Whether it's something seemingly innocent or something blatantly terrible that you know can take you away from God. And just remember that when you feel that God is not there, when you feel that you don't feel that light and that love that you've become addicted to, it's most likely because it's something that you've done or something that you're not doing. And that's not to say all the time. God makes us go through trials. He allows suffering in our lives because it strengthens us, and we learn lessons from it, and we grow from it. But so many times when we think God is not there, it's not because of Him, it's because of us. So I hope that helps you. May God bless you, your family, and your life.